Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Braden. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And hey, flying solo once again. Cousin Shane's still on vacation, so reached out to friend of the show, Dan Mathews. He's the producer of the Chuck Oliver Show. If you know SEC football, you should know Chuck. Biggest show out of Atlanta, covers the entire SEC 365. So looking forward to that. Really good conversation with Dan Mathews. Tried to hit on as many teams as I could. I think you guys will really appreciate that one. But we got a couple news items, and I thought, hey, this would be a good time to kind of do a little recap of the transfer portal. I mean, we're still getting commitments. We don't have guys jumping into the portal anymore, thankfully, but still some commitments here and there coming. Really starting to slow down. Have every single SEC team, did they upgrade or downgrade their overall roster via the transfer portal window? We'll get to that in just a minute, but let's start with something I know a lot, not only Alabama fans, but the rest of the SEC should be monitoring, and that's, of course, the coordinator search going on down there in Tuscaloosa. Latest news, looks like Alabama may be closing in on an offensive coordinator hire, and the name to know now is Washington offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb was reportedly on campus down there in Tuscaloosa interviewing for the job, and this would potentially be a home run, I would think, for Alabama. I think it fits better than Jeff Lebby, who's a name many have known. It fits better than Derek Dooley, who's apparently that's a name to know for the Alabama coordinator search, but I kind of kid, but people are actually saying Derek Dooley could be a candidate. Ryan Grubb, why this would be a good move? Washington, 11-2 last season. Michael Penix Jr., former Indiana quarterback, now at Washington, 4,641 passing yards last season, 31 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, over 65% completion percentage for Michael Penix, the quarterback there under Ryan Grubb at Washington. And A&M made a run at this Grubb. Here's apparently how the deal went down. He got a contract extension as soon as the season was over to make a little over $1.4 million next season. Then Texas A&M comes calling. Now he's got upgraded to around $2 million for next season to stay at Washington. Now Alabama's come a-calling. So I have to imagine if this is the guy, Alabama fans are going to take some pride in the fact that Nick Saban got a guy that Jimbo Fisher couldn't get. What else is new? Grubb has rated as a top 10 offensive play caller, according to our friend Adam McClintock. We've referenced his play caller rankings many times on this podcast, but Grubb rated again as a top 10 play caller overall, as well as adjusted for roster talent, which I think is the more accurate grading method. I believe Grubb rated as the number 7 offensive play caller in the country, adjusted for talent, according to Adam McClintock, the CFB professor's number. So again, this potentially big news here for Alabama getting their offensive coordinator. I think the offensive coordinator is a position that is of much more importance than who they hire on defense, because we all know it's Nick Saban's defense. He's going to have his hands all over what they're doing on that side of the ball. His success next season and for the years to come is reliant on an offensive coordinator hire. And if they get Ryan Grubb, have to imagine this is a coup of a hire. So we'll see if this is the way it goes. But certainly you're not having someone come to campus and interview for the job if he's not a serious contender. And the fact that he's been given 2 raises and is still out here looking at a job like this certainly suggests that Ryan Grubb is also serious about this. Otherwise, Washington may treat him like Kendall Browse and just cut him loose. One other thing real quick on Alabama, I just thought this was pretty interesting, but Coach Saban was at a Alabama coaching clinic over the weekend and claims that a recruit top corner is I believe how he called it, asked for $800,000 to come to Alabama. And Nick Saban said, well, hell, you can find somewhere else to play football. Now, he doesn't name who that is, but that's pretty interesting. He's also claiming that a former player was asking that his girlfriend get into law school at Alabama and was asking for Alabama to pay her tuition, which I've heard of a lot of shenanigans, recruiting stories. I've never heard for a girlfriend's law school tuition to be paid by the football program. I don't even know how that would be possible to do. But again, the NIL is not supposed to come from the coaches. We know it kind of does, but I think this is Nick Saban letting people know, whoever this corner is that he's referencing, wherever he did end up, I think he's letting you know it costs that team a lot of money to get him. And I think the assumption is that's probably the top corner. I think his name's McClain. Was supposed to go to Miami. Didn't sign. Now he's at Colorado playing for Deion Sanders. Again, I don't know if that's who he's talking about, but certainly suggests that's the player in question here. Jumping over to the SEC East real quick. Todd Monken, rumors to the NFL continue. Last week it was reported that he was going to meet with the Tampa Bay Bucks. Now, according to Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network, Todd Monken interview with the Ravens as well. And here's exactly what Tom Pelissero says. The Ravens interviewed Georgia offensive coordinator Todd Monken for the offensive coordinator job. This week, Monken has been eyeing a potential NFL return and is also slated to speak with the Bucs. So, man, you throw in multiple teams here that Todd Monken is reportedly discussing making a move to. That's not great news for Georgia. One report you could certainly overlook, but multiple, I don't know. This suggests, Monken more interested in not having to recruit than going after the three-peat, which at least he's not gone or anything. I believe he's the highest paid assistant coach in college football, so no need to feel bad for Todd Monken here, reigning back-to-back national champion. But this would be potentially a huge loss for Georgia. And who that next offensive coordinator would be? Would it be a Mike Bobo? Would it be a Buster Faulkner who left recently to go run Georgia Tech's offense? It's going to be pretty interesting to see if a decision has to be made where Kirby will go, because it could, much like Nick Saban, who's running the ship on the offensive side of the ball, could determine just how good, how far Georgia can go next season. So that's one to watch. And last thing here on Georgia real quick, G-Day spring game officially set for Saturday, April 15th. And we also got one other here from Florida, the Orange and Blue spring game set for Thursday, April 13th. Florida's been doing some of these weird Thursdays. I think they did Friday a couple years ago. They did a Friday spring game. Not a big fan of that, but hey, it is what it is. What you don't want, if you're someone like Billy Napier, is to go the same day as Georgia, the same day as Alabama, and have these elite recruits have to decide between your school and theirs, because where Georgia's at right now, where Alabama's at, probably going to not win those battles. So you have this thing on Thursday, gives players an opportunity to visit multiple spring games. So there is something to be said for that. And speaking of the transfer portal, we'll get to these transfer portal class grades in just a second, but little SEC to SEC transfer action that is kind of notable. Mississippi State lands Georgia tight end transfer Rylan Godey. He's a 6'6", 240-pound tight end there from Georgia. Didn't make a ton of impact in Athens, but they're so loaded at the tight end position that's somewhat understandable. And I've heard Rusty Manziel over there at Dogs 247 say this Godey is a real player here, and Georgia's losing something with him hitting the transfer portal. So why I really wanted to pay attention to this one, I believe Mississippi State has not signed a true tight end since the Dan Mullen era. And that's spanning a couple coaches here, Joe Moorhead and Mike Leach. Sometimes we forget about Moorhead. That was such a quick stint there. But clearly Zach Arnett pushing things in a different direction at Mississippi State. If we're out here landing a tight end from an SEC school like Georgia to come in, you got to think he's an immediate starter. Hell, they haven't signed a tight end in 6 recruiting classes here. So, hey, things are changing and changing quickly at Mississippi State. So I just wanted to call attention to that. Clearly, Zach Arnett pushing Mississippi State's offense into a different direction. But all right, so that's a perfect segue to break down these transfer portal classes following the first transfer portal window session. And like I said, I mean, these commitments continue to come in. They're trickling in at this point in time. So, I mean, we're getting like 1 or 2 a day. So there's not going to be a ton more movement here. But I just thought this would be a good way to evaluate losses, gains. Someone mentioned that, while we have already hit on some of this on this show, the overall numbers, lost, gained, all that needed to be in a more straightforward format. So I'm going to do my best here, run down all 14. Let's start with Alabama, just really going in alphabetical order here. But so Alabama lost 15 players to the transfer portal, and a majority of these have already signed elsewhere. 10 of the 15 they've lost have gone on to Power 5 schools. Now, obviously, if you're leaving Alabama, that is going to open a lot of doors across college football. Programs are willing to take an Alabama guy because they were so highly regarded coming in. And some of these players were impact, but many of them, just the presence was not felt in Tuscaloosa. So naturally, that leads to transfers in the modern era. But Alabama only gained 2 players. Now, they were both from Power 5 institutions, the Maryland tight end and Tresman Marshall, the linebacker from Georgia. But overall, you're still minus 13. So I got to give Alabama for now a downgrade. I think they downgraded the overall roster. But again, when you sign what some people are saying is the best recruiting class ever, you got room. You got to make room, so to speak, for some elite players. And no one here that left is you're getting killed by, essentially. You didn't lose Bryce Young, Will Anderson, anything like that. So I do think it's a downgrade, but a minor one for Alabama. And if there's a spot or two to be filled in the second transfer portal window, now that we'll have some coordinators. Hopefully they got some coordinators by spring down there in Tuscaloosa. You got to believe that if there's a premier playmaker or two, the Crimson Tide will be a factor to add them. Now, how about Arkansas? You lost 23 players, one of the highest numbers in the SEC during the transfer portal window, but only 8 of those moved on to a Power 5 school. So, we're talking a third here, essentially. You gained 11 players. So overall, you're down 12 scholarship players. But I consider this an upgrade. It's a slight upgrade for Arkansas, but I do think they upgraded their roster. Sam Pittman's program, they have already proven to be one of the best in the SEC for bringing in transfers, getting the most out of them, getting them to the NFL. I think that will continue with some of the players they got here. Been hearing some good things about a lot of these guys. And again, the players you did lose, the biggest one is probably Jalen Catalon, and he couldn't stay healthy. I loved watching that guy play. He was, in my opinion, one of the top safeties in the SEC, which made him a top safety in the country. But you're not worth anything to anyone if you can't stay on the field. And sorry to say, too often he was on the sideline. So is that really a loss? It's kind of hard to kind of call it that. But he was, one of the few that I would really say was a loss. Trey Knox, not the most popular player after leaving, but I think that's a loss. Keytron Jackson, I think, is a potential big loss. And, someone like Miles Slusher, who ended up at Colorado, I think got addition by subtraction with some of these guys. So, I like this class for Arkansas. And again, maybe some of my thinking is just their track record with transfers has been outstanding. So until further notice, I think it'll remain that way. Now, how about Auburn? I think they were hands down the biggest winner of the early transfer period. They lost 9 guys, but only one of those went on to a Power 5 program. So that gives you an indication that they're losing guys that couldn't play at this level. And Auburn was already maybe the worst team in the SEC last season. And if they couldn't play there, maybe they just can't play at this level. I'm not trying to disrespect them. They gained 12 players, which is kind of the critical factor there. And these are elite players. They added more SEC players than anybody. And nearly every one of these additions was either Power 5 or a low-level all-conference selection. So immediate impact, number 1 class in the SEC, in my opinion, via the transfer portal window. Auburn, you killed it. You got roster spots aplenty to fill, and you did it during that transfer portal window. Now, how about Florida? Lost 22 players to the transfer portal. 12 of them went on to the Power 5, so that's a high number. Gained 10, so you're still down 12 overall, but this is a tough one for me. I'm not really saying a positive or a negative. I'm saying a neutral class for the Gators. You did lose so many guys to the Power 5, but you lost more to the lower levels, G5s, and you're bringing in some real nice players here. Again, this class will probably be defined by how good Graham Mertz is, and if he is your starting quarterback, that'll be interesting. You're bringing in a lot of offensive linemen, and Billy Napier's program have already proven they can get the most out of some of these guys. They inserted some transfers on the offensive line last season, and offensive line has been an issue for Florida for years. They come right in and turn that around. So if they can do that with some of these additions, potentially a great transfer class for Florida. But for now, I'm not saying a negative or a positive, kind of putting them at a neutral. Georgia, you lost 10 players to the transfer portal. 8 of them have gone on to the Power 5, and the only 2 that haven't, they're likely headed to the Power 5. So essentially, everybody you lost onto the Power 5, still waiting for Dominique Blaylock and Jaheim Singletary to make their decisions. But I have to imagine, they'll have some Power 5 offers. You did gain 3 players, 3 really good players at that, but 1 is already suspended. So we don't even know if Ra Thomas, if he's going to play for your team or not, that his status is kind of up in limbo right now. So you're down 7 scholarship players. I'm going to give this an overall downgrade. I think they downgraded the roster via the transfer portal, but I've said it on this show many times. I think Dominic Lovett could be the best signing of the transfer portal period across the SEC, if not the country. I guess you got to say quarterback, is the biggest impacts potentially all across college football with these transfers. But if we're moving us on from the impact of quarterbacks, Dominic Lovett, I think, it has the potential to be the biggest impact signee. So while you may have downgraded the roster just minimally, again, this is Georgia we're talking about. They signed the number 2 class in the country. They're not going to be hurting for talent. You may have lost a little overall, but you could be the big winner if you hit the jackpot here with Dominic Lovett. Kentucky lost 13 players to the transfer portal, but only 5 of those went on to Power 5 schools. You gained 8 players, and I'm going to consider this an overall upgrade because a lot of the guys you lost, Justin Rogers, that hurts. That's a big one. Kenyatta Goodwin to Florida, potentially that could come back to bite you. But, not a lot of huge impact players lost here, in my opinion. Whereas you add Tanner Bowles from Alabama on offensive line. J.Q. Hardaway, I've heard great things from him. The DB from Cincinnati. Devin Leary, of course. Ray Davis from Vanderbilt. I like this class for Kentucky. I see some big impact. So overall, numbers-wise, down, but upgrade overall by hitting your key needs. That's what Kentucky had to do during this transfer portal window. LSU lost 13 scholarship players to the portal, 8 to the Power 5. So a little over half, but you gained 11. So, And look at some of these guys you gained. I mean, I think this is arguably the second best class in the SEC, the transfer portal era. You got Denver Harris, who could slide in right away as your starting cornerback from Texas A&M. Omar Speights from Oregon State, the All-American, should slide right in as a starting linebacker. Aaron Anderson from Alabama, the receiver, the Louisiana kid, could fill the shoes of Kayshon Boutte, who's off to the NFL. I love this class, and I like the fact that they attacked the defensive line, the secondary, two potential weaknesses for LSU. Brian Kelly really knocked it out of the park with the transfer portal last offseason. I think he may have done it once again here as well. Ole Miss lost 25 players, scholarship players, to the portal, but only 6 moved on to the Power 5 level. So you're not losing a ton here. You gained 14 players. A lot of potential impact players here for the Rebels in this class. I think this is an upgrade. I mean, we call him the Portal King for a reason. We got to give Lane Kiffin some credit when it comes to adding some of these transfers. I mean, we'll see how this quarterback situation plays out, but needless to say, as long as they don't blow up and they don't all transfer out, an upgrade at quarterback, every team is interested in something like that. When you bring in 2 potential starters to compete with your returning starter, I mean, someone's got to emerge there. I love that they address kicking. That has been an issue at times. They got some potential big-time receivers, Chris Marshall, Trey Harris. The linebackers are outstanding, including my guy Monty Montgomery. I think he's got the potential to be an all-SEC selection. So, hey, give it to Lane Kiffin, Pete Golding, really shoring up his defense and some weaknesses on the offense via the transfer portal. They are also among the contenders, I would think, for top class, even after losing so many guys. Mississippi State, you lost 12 to the transfer portal, 5 to the Power 5, and I'm including Dylan Johnson. Still don't know what's up with him. He may come back. He may go to Ole Miss. He announced he's heading to Washington. I don't think that's happening anymore. So, we'll see. Mississippi State, this could be an opportunity for you to get one of your premier players back. But you gained 9, and more importantly, you kept Tulu Griffin and Xavion Thomas from leaving. I love the addition of Mike Wright. I don't know how that's going to work, but I think he's a potential impact player for you this season at Mississippi State in whatever role. And Radarius Jones, Kamari Rogers, the 2 defensive backs, I think these are guys that have the talent to compete for Mississippi State. Day one, they set foot on campus, and we covered it before. Nicholas Barr-Mira, the kicker. I mean, kicker's been a major issue for Mississippi State, so I give this class a big upgrade, even though you lost Ra Thomas, who he may prove to be the most valuable transfer of any in the SEC, but I don't know. Again, we'll have to see if he even makes it to the field for Georgia. How about Missouri? You lost 15 players to the transfer portal, but only 4 went on to the Power 5. You gained 8. And this class, to me, it's kind of hard to say, so I'm leaving it neutral for now. Kind of depends on what you get from Jake Garcia, Theo Weiss, and Dennis Jackson. You need help at receiver after losing Lovett. Clearly need help at quarterback, or at least stabilize that position. I'm a big fan of adding arms to the roster, talented players, and we still don't know what we're getting in the new offensive coordinator, Kirby Moore, but give him options. Let him find his guy. Everyone with a clean slate. I think that's the only way to do it. So this class could be a home run for Missouri, but for now, just because I don't know what Jake Garcia will give him, I'll give him a neutral on this one. You did lose arguably the top player overall, skill position anyway, in the transfer portal. South Carolina, you lost 13 players to the portal, but only 5 landed at Power 5 schools. You gained 8. I like this class for South Carolina, but I'm giving it a neutral as well, because you did lose some premier players like Marshawn Lloyd, Jordan Burch, Jaheim Bell. He's got massive potential. Just never got him the damn football for whatever reason. But you're bringing in guys like Trey Knox. I love Trey Knox. Jerron Willis from Ole Miss. I think that potentially is a nice pickup. You got the tight end Elksness from Florida. You got to imagine he'll contribute considering you lost so many tight ends. So this is a good class, but I'm not quite ready to say this is a positive or a minus. I think it's kind of a neutral for South Carolina. Tennessee, you lost 12 to the transfer portal, but only 4 went on to pick a Power 5 school, so just a third of the guys you lost. You gained 8. But I really like these additions. I mean, Tennessee, I think, is doing it how you kind of have to do it. You've got to recruit, obviously, to win in major college football, and then use the portal to shore up potential issues. Tight end, kicker, offensive line, linebacker, corner, receiver, defensive line. I mean, you are adding some talented, productive players, many leaders here. I think this is an upgrade for Tennessee. And again, no superstars, but that's not what this roster requires right now. It just requires some talented, depth, experienced players that can come in and compete. And I think they'll do that on Rocky Top. Texas A&M, you lost 25 players to the portal, more than anybody in the country. 13 of those guys went on to a Power 5 school. You gained only 3, but they are a good 3. I'll give them that. But being minus 22 overall players, down 22 players overall, I have to give this a downgrade of your overall roster. But again, I think Tony Grimes, Sam McCall, Tyron Smith, the UTEP receiver, I believe he had over 1,000 yards last season at UTEP. These are all potential impact players, particularly the defensive backs. I think A&M's getting some good players here. They just lost so many. It's depth was a huge concern for A&M, and that's kind of why their season went sideways. And when you lose this many guys, depth may be an issue once again, unless you add during the second portal window. And last but not least, Vanderbilt, you lost 8. 3 of them went on to the Power 5. Unfortunately, all 3 landed in the SEC, so you lost some really good players. You only gained 1 player via the transfer portal. I got to give this a downgrade of the overall roster as well. You're down 7 scholarship players, but we all know Clark Lee, big on development, putting in his culture. Just hated some of these losses, some of the key players that we lost off Vanderbilt's roster to the transfer portal. But all right, hey, so that's enough of me spieling. Let's kick it over to our interview. Dan Mathews from the Chuck Oliver Show. I hope you guys appreciate this one as much as I did recording it. All right, we're pleased to be joined by Dan Mathews, producer extraordinaire, of course, executive producer of the Chuck Oliver Show. Everybody knows Chuck Oliver and the Chuck Oliver Show. Down there, 680 The Fan. Dan, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Mike, always good, man. It's always great to catch up with you. And, you know, we've been doing this for some time as well. I mean, there was a time also before we were speaking into microphones, or in this case right now, computers, that we were doing the written word thing. So it's been a long time, man. Always appreciate the chance to catch up with you and talk some ball.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm sure, you know, you're down there, you're based out of Atlanta, just getting bombarded with Georgia, you know, content, Todd Monken, what's happening there, Stetson Bennett, what in the world's happening to Stetson Bennett. But last week on the Chuck Oliver Show, you hosted a couple episodes and you hit on something that I thought was really, hey, it was brave. It was brave of someone based out of Atlanta to even suggest this. But you said Stetson Bennett, not a college football Hall of Famer, not taken away from anything he's accomplished. Right. He should have a statue outside of that stadium at some point in the future. But can you kind of rehash why you think Stetson Bennett maybe shouldn't be a college football Hall of Famer?
Well, I mean, and again, too, you know, I appreciate the way that you built that up there, is that it's not taking away from what he accomplished. He is the most accomplished quarterback in Georgia football history. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And it's also, too, you know, the numbers that he put up were fantastic. I just said that it was a situation of, I believe Hall of Famers are, you look at them and if, without a doubt, you say Hall of Famer, best player on their team. If not the best player, one of the 2 best players on their team, because I think of the Hall of Fame as being elite company, not just company for any really good player because, baseball, I understand, is a sport that gets a lot of consternation for, how the players are put into the Hall of Fame and, what exactly is the criteria for them, but the criteria for somebody else. But I think right here with Stetson Bennett, he had an outstanding career and he put together a really good career. But notice the words that I just said right there, really good. If I had said great or elite, and we're talking about historic numbers, and he is able, because I think that there is for the College Football Hall of Fame, I do like that there is that criteria of an All-American because the All-Americans are the elite of the sport. They're the best. Now, is it subjective, honor? Is it something that maybe, somebody didn't get voted in because not enough eyes got to them? Sure, I understand that. Not every, just rubric is perfect. But in this case right here, I just think as the individual, Stetson Bennett is not a Hall of Famer. I think as a collective in what he contributed, absolutely, Stetson Bennett is going to go down as one of the greatest players in Georgia football history.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you nailed it because at times, certainly he didn't even appear to be the best player on his team. Now, when the moment was brightest, certainly you can make a case he was, but yeah, I don't know if I'm quite ready to say College Football Hall of Famer. But speaking of the Dogs, let's stick with them for just a moment here, Dan. If you had to bet right now, what's more likely? Georgia wins another national championship, 3 in a row. It's incredible we're even asking these types of questions. Or someone else wins the SEC next season. Which way would you go with that?
Oh, man, that's a tough one because, let's just start with the second part first. To kind of build into my answer is, you're going to have a much improved LSU team. Now, are they good enough to close that gap with Georgia? I don't believe I'm ready to get to that point, even with some of the losses that Georgia's going to have to sustain and the questions that have to be answered, including who's going to be your offensive coordinator next year and who's going to be your quarterback. Those are two incredibly important questions to answer. Same deal with Alabama. I just have some questions on the front for Alabama. Is that where we're talking about Georgia right now? That's the way we used to talk about Alabama in terms of dominant line play on both lines of scrimmage. And they haven't had that really across the board for the last couple of seasons. So I think with all that baked in, I feel a lot more confident that I'm saying that Georgia has a really good chance to be a three-peat national champion because you see what the schedule is next season. The fact that they don't have to go to Norman, Oklahoma helps them out even more. What was it? The ESPN S&P rankings or whatever they call those, whatever the measurement is that they have for analytics, saying that I guess like their toughest game next year is going to be Tennessee. And I think they still gave them a 75% chance to go into Knoxville and win that game. So if you're getting that type of odds in terms of how people think that game's going to go, then, it shows you exactly the confidence that people have in your team. I think that the other wild card is going to be, does Kirby finally have that team? Now, this is what I mean. Is that Nick Saban, at least 2 or 3 times during this run of success that he's had at Alabama, has had that quote unquote team. Maybe a little bit of entitlement crept in, maybe a little bit of, we don't have to do all these things. Look at all the returners we have. Look at all these guys. And that's something that Kirby immediately on the podium in Los Angeles after the game said, is he said, toughest challenge is going to be trying to tell these guys, you didn't do it. They did it. You haven't done it yet. So I think that's going to be the other part of all of this as well. But to answer your question, though, I think that probably I would feel more confident in the three-peat than I would, in somebody else because it's the SEC. We've been doing this long enough, Mike. Anybody can creep up and you just say, damn, I didn't see that coming.
Well, you mentioned Alabama there. I wanted to ask you about them, Dan. Both coordinator spots currently unfilled, and this has been for a little while now. We knew both coordinators were going to change in Tuscaloosa. Could you make the argument that these are the biggest hires Nick Saban's ever had to make? Because obviously Georgia is now the king of college football. LSU has emerged. A&M kind of has not really emerged, but they're a threat. There's Tennessee is an emerging threat. Nick Saban cannot afford to screw these up, can he?
No, he absolutely cannot. And, I said this last week on the show is I said, just as good as Nick Saban is at evaluating player talent, he might be even better at evaluating coaching talent. And, you just look at the, coaches that he has brought in the past. And, I know Steve Sarkisian was already there as an analyst. Lane Kiffin was already there as an analyst, but then he felt confident enough to put them in charge of running the offense. and the offense was able to have just amazing amounts of success. Same deal with Mike Loxley, too, as well, who was part of the rehabilitation program there in Tuscaloosa, and then able to get on the field, and now is doing a great job at Maryland after, getting people to see, okay, pretty good offensive mind. That's somebody that we can trust as a coach. So I think that's going to be the key, because here's the other thing is as well. Great coaches aren't just out there. There's a lot of really good coaches, and there's also some very mediocre coaches who have been able to at least, show people, or at least lead people to believe that they're in that other group of coaches, the good coaches that I just talked about. So I think that that's going to be the biggest challenge that he has. And the funny thing is, I think, Mike, is the best hires he's made really have been ones that did get a little bit of criticism. I mean, remember going into the 2017 season, I brought this up last week as well, that Brian Daboll, when he was brought on, because it was everything that people believed that Nick Saban wanted offensively. Here is kind of a husky looking guy that was with Bill Belichick. Oh, he's going to run that boring pro style offense. Just when we're starting to let the kids have some fun on offense, Nick, then you decide to bring in a guy. And I remember somebody even kind of bringing it up in that way during spring practice. And Nick Saban says, who says we're going to slow things down? Who says we're going to do all these things? And then, oh, by the way, they end up going on and winning a national title that season. And Brian Daboll probably gets catapulted into the NFL with the Bills, and then now with the New York Giants because of that season, what he was able to do. So I think that's the other part of it as well. And I think that the other thing that kind of leads into all of this with Alabama right now is, what identity do you want offensively and defensively? I think is going to be the question that needs to be answered. I talked with Clint Lamb of the Bama Insider last week, and he brought up the point that, he wouldn't be surprised if Nick Saban wants to see this get to a little bit more of a run-based attack. And that's not to say that they're not going to put up huge passing numbers. That's not to say, hey, top-tier quarterbacks and wide receivers don't come here, because it's going to be early 2010s Alabama offense with a guy like A.J. McCarron under center, and we're running that type of attack. I don't think we're going to see that. I think you're still going to see very much the RPO attack still attached to this offense. I just think that Nick Saban realizes we've gotten away from what our calling card was, and our calling card was physicality. I think he's got to try to find a way with both these hires to be able to get back to what made Alabama football. How
about Tennessee, Dan? Do you think they could still potentially compete for an SEC East? I mean, it's difficult to imagine because Georgia's so good, but maybe being the second best team in the SEC without Hendon Hooker, I think the roster, you can make the case, is going to be more talented, deeper than ever under Josh Heupel, staff continuity. And I realize there is some star power gone, but my God, I mean, all Josh Heupel's system does seems to insert a new guy, and they're just as high flying. What's your hopes for Tennessee next season?
Oh, still very high. I mean, I think that Joe Mixon, kind of the, second chance at a college football career. I guess it would really be his third, but you get what I mean. At least when he came back in, I think that it was almost kind of like a, under the tutelage of Josh Heupel of, oh, wow, this is fun. Oh, I was doing that wrong. Okay, let me fix that, because the arm talent has never been an issue. I mean, we saw it this weekend of him, palming a basketball and throwing it damn near into the second level there at the, Thompson Bowling Center there in Knoxville. So the arm talent's not an issue. Brew McCoy, kind of the same deal. I mean, I think if nothing else, this is kind of, the little bit of the calling card for this, Tennessee, program now, is that even if it's your third chance, we can still make it work for you. And Brew McCoy has shown that. And he's somebody that I think is going to be looked to a lot, with Cedric Tillman and also Jalen Hyatt, both being on to the NFL. But you said a couple of things right there. Number one is depth, and the fact that they actually have tangible, functional depth now that can be capable contributors on the field. That leads you to believe that this thing can continue and that it can get better. And the transfers that they brought in as well, both from the FBS and junior college level as well. And then also, too, the signing class that they have, what kind of role could Nicholas Iamaleava have next year? I guess Nico Iamaleava is what he goes by, but you get my point. Is he somebody that kind of, starts to vie for some snaps, maybe even a package or two, because in the transfer portal era, I think you know as well as anybody, Mike, that, redshirting does not necessarily exist. And if it does exist, you at least need to show that there is a path the following year to being able to get on the field. If you don't, then they're going to leave. And I think that that's going to be kind of a juggling effort that Josh Heupel and his coaching staff have to do is, look, people can say, oh, you don't pander to the blue chips. You don't do all that kind of stuff. In the age of the transfer portal, you kind of have to, because if you really have plans for them in the future, you got to show it in the immediate. So, I'm with you. I don't think that there is any reason to believe that they take a significant step back. Like, I'm not seeing, 8-4, 7-5 from this team next year, but I do think probably maybe a more of a 9-3, 10-2, like what they did finish this year, could very much be in the cards. And also too, look, here's the beauty of it. As well as anybody, I know as well as anybody, playing on Rocky Top is hard as an opponent. It is not easy to go there as a visitor. And if that game has SEC East implications in November, who's to say that Tennessee couldn't do to Georgia like what LSU did to Alabama last year and be able to be in that driver's seat? So it's going to be a tough one there later on in the season. There's no doubt about it for Georgia.
Now, how about our guy, Jimbo Fisher? That's someone that I don't want to say you went in on, because I don't think there's anything you said that was inaccurate that you hit on the Chuck Oliver show. I wanted to get your thoughts on that real quick. And I think I'm banned from the good people of Texags for just all the comments I've made on Feinbaum and on my show about Jimbo. What did you have to say? Because I thought you put it really well. He kind of is who he is potentially there in College Station.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming up on year 6 now. So 18 was his first year. So math, not necessarily my thing, but you get my point. I mean, usually this is how things go for a coach in college football now. You need to show improvement in year 2. If you don't, then year 3 is a must. Now, in fairness, year 3 was a good season for them, where they were able to make the New Year's 6 bowl games. I understand, the interesting season that was the COVID year of 2020, but still, you at least showed some improvement. And then 21, you showed some good things, but then you also had those Aggie moments. And I think that it's something with Jimbo Fisher that when you're being trusted with as much of the program as you're being trusted with, because he's being given the keys to the program, kind of like Kirby is in Athens and Nick is in Tuscaloosa. When that's the case, 10-2, I think, needs to be your floor. And when you're not able to do that, then you're going to start having people asking questions of, what are you missing there in College Station? Like, are you not as good as we think that you are? Because I got to be honest with you, it's really starting to trend towards that. If not, it's not starting to trend towards that for me. It is showing that for me, that he is what he is. And he had outstanding talent when he was at Florida State. Now, here's the thing, though, too, is I say that and people say, well, anybody can win with great talent. No, we've seen coaches who had a tremendous collection of talent and they messed it up. They screwed it up. And I wouldn't say that he has completely screwed it up, because he won a national title with Jameis Winston at Florida State. You win a national title, not just everybody does that. And he was able to do that. So that's got to be able to have some credit. But I mean, we're 10 years since that national title, almost 10 years. Can you really continue to give somebody continuous credit for winning a national title about 10 years ago? I kind of feel like that's the wave that he rides right now. And I think if nothing else, it's going to be interesting to see how he bounces back from a pretty good shot to the ego of, I don't necessarily believe that Jimbo Fisher would just say, you know what? I'm in the way here of the offense. I need to give this thing up. That's what he is. He is offense, that he is supposed to be an offensive guru. I think that it did take a little bit of, hey, step aside. Like, you need to step aside for the betterment of the program. And I don't think it was necessarily a, hey, step aside, otherwise things could get bad around here. I think that it was more or less a, hey, what we're doing just isn't working. We got to do something else. And I'm kind of curious to see if indeed that was his decision to come to that alone.
Now, we've got a little bit of a emerging rivalry here after the coaching cycle here. Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss, Hugh Freeze, Auburn. I really do think genuinely they hate each other based on everything I've been told. So let me ask you this. This is your opportunity to piss off one of these fan bases and to be a hero to the other. If one of them wins an SEC title or maybe even an SEC West title, that maybe that's a more accurate question, who does it first? Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, Hugh Freeze at Auburn.
Boy, I'll tell you, I just think that with what Auburn is able to do more than Ole Miss on the recruiting trail, I would trust Hugh Freeze in that regard, because, just the high school recruiting alone has not necessarily been able to pick up for Lane like you'd think it would. Now, the transfer portal has been unreal. He's been almost a wizard in terms of what he's able to do in the transfer portal. So that's on that front. I think now at least a couple of times with Auburn, we have seen that the path back to competition is a lot easier for them, because I think more than anything with Auburn, if you show that you care, then you can be able to cut in to Southwest Georgia, the Columbus and LaGrange area right there, and be able to get kids from Carver and the great schools and those great programs there in that area to travel west, as opposed to going northeast and going up to Athens and playing at Georgia. So I think that's key for them right there. I think being able to recruit in state in Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile. I mean, lower Alabama, when Auburn's really been able to get this thing going, they've almost had a stranglehold on, Fairhope and Spanish Fort and those areas right there in the Mobile area. So I think that's the other part of it as well. That leads me to believe that Auburn could be able to find their way back. Now, look, it's not an indictment on Lane Kiffin. I just think that it's a little bit of, and he's even talked about this with name, image, and likeness, of not necessarily having the same resources that an Auburn has. Jimmy Rain and the crew there at Auburn, if they're really fully in and they're really able to back somebody, there on the plains, then they can absolutely compete and they can absolutely win. I just think that the recruiting wins need to happen for them on the trail for them to be able to pick up and win on the field. And look, I understand how people feel about Hugh Freeze. That's not lost on me. But as a football coach, and isn't it always fun to be able to say that as a football coach, what they really are, he's aces. I mean, he did an outstanding job at Ole Miss, and I understand what comes with his time at Ole Miss. But at the same time, though, too, look at what he did at Liberty and how he built up that program and have now made them a viable program there. So, there's no reason to believe that he can't come to Auburn. And, on the recruiting trail, he can get guys to get there. And I understand the jokes that come with that, but he can get guys to come to Auburn. And he's also doing pretty well on the transfer portal as well right now. I think it's going to be interesting in the immediate. What does he have with Robbie Ashford? Is that going to be something that they're able to, have a success story in terms of what he's able to do at the quarterback, or does Holden Grenier find his way on the field as well this year? So I think there's some questions about Auburn, but as we've seen on the plains before as well, sometimes the turnaround is not as long as you think it would be.
Now, same question, two teams in the East. So, Dan, which one more likely to win an East title? Shane Beamer at South Carolina or Billy Napier at Florida? It's hard to put a pulse on either of them. I mean, South Carolina gets blown out by Florida, then they whip Tennessee, beat Clemson. Florida whips South Carolina, then they turn around, lose to Vanderbilt. So I don't know what in the hell to make of these teams. Which one's closer to winning a division title, do you think?
I think South Carolina is right now. I mean, I think getting Spence Rattler back is an absolute huge addition for them. Now, I understand that they had some losses in the transfer portal, but, they've also been able to have some significant wins on the recruiting trail. And I think that they will continue to make some strong roads there on the transfer portal. I think more than anything at South Carolina, what had been missing since about 2014, I would probably say, was their last real competitive season that they had there under Steve Spurrier, is the belief in the program, because there was that stretch from 2010 to 2014 where, South Carolina was a team you looked at and you said, hey, hold on, we got to worry about what those guys are able to do in Columbia, South Carolina. And I think that Shane Beamer is able to build that up just a little bit. Now, it's not to say that Billy Napier doesn't have that going on right now at Florida. I think in terms of the belief in him as a coach, that most of the fan base is behind him. I think that they realized that he was in a pretty tough situation last year where he had to really try to repair some of those recruiting relationships that, weren't necessarily as much of a priority under the previous coaching staff. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn on that. I think that was pretty much shown that recruiting was not, the end all be all that it is in Athens, that it is in Tuscaloosa, that it is in Baton Rouge, that it is in many other places. And Billy Napier really had to try to go in there in state, which that's a tough place to be able to dominate because there's so many different options for kids in the Sunshine State alone. And that's something that I think he had to try to be able to do. I think the Jaden Rashada situation was pretty interesting. I think if nothing else, it kind of shows you not only how he's handling it, but remember, Nick Saban over the weekend speaking at the Alabama Coaches Association, talking about kids immediately bringing up name, image, and likeness. And he's saying, I think you need to find somewhere else to play. Now, guys like Nick Saban can say that because it's they can almost pick and choose who they want. It is a reality in college sports now. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I don't think that's lost on Billy Napier. I just think that he has a little bit, more steep of a climb than what Shane Beamer is dealing with right now. I think that Shane Beamer, the situation that he's in is a lot like the situation that Tennessee is in to some degree, where he's exactly like I talked about last week with The Part in the Departed with Martin Sheen. Do it again. That's what South Carolina's got to do. They got to do it again. They've got to be able to go out and show that last season wasn't just a pop season in terms of how they ended the season, that this is a program that you can go to and that you can be able to have some success. You can compete for the SEC East and you can be able to get to the next level. I think if they're able to do those three things, then I think you can see a team that can compete for SEC East titles every now and then.
All right, one last one real quick, Dan. Arkansas and Missouri, both I think you can make or at a crossroads. Arkansas coaching and roster turnover. Missouri not quite lived up to the hype. Questions about Drink's ability to run an offense. He's hired an offensive coordinator. Which team wins more games next season, Arkansas or Missouri?
I like Arkansas. I think that, KJ Jefferson being back helps. I think Dan Enos coming back definitely helps for what he was able to do. I mean, I know that Dave Bartu with us last week was not as high on Dan Enos, but at least, I look at what Dan Enos did at Alabama with the quarterback development of both Tua Tagovailoa and also of Jalen Hurts. I mean, I'm sure Jalen Hurts, if you asked him, next week at the Super Bowl media availabilities, what did Dan Enos do for you? He'd probably say, I'm not here right now without Dan Enos. So I think that that's huge for him as well. Arkansas has been able to show you that they are a transfer portal destination, that they can be a place where players can succeed. And also, too, for the reason that you just said, kind of like what I said about Jimbo Fisher earlier, that's the way I feel about Eli Drinkwitz. It's just kind of like, what's been the deal with you offensively? Like, why has this thing not necessarily gotten going from the coach that we knew about when he was with Gus at Auburn and what you were able to do at Appalachian State as well. And, it helps to have Luther Burden back. That's absolutely a huge plus for them. But in terms of just the overall coaching staff across the board, the players that Arkansas has as opposed to Missouri, I definitely would trust Sam Pittman's crew much more than I would trust Eli Drinkwitz's right now. I think that there's so many more questions offensively, which you shouldn't have, as opposed to what Arkansas has coming back from last year's team.
Yeah, and all those angry messages in your mentions, those are Mizzou fans now, Dan, so thank you for that. Can you tell the audience before you go, where's the best place to find all your work?
Yeah, questions, comments, criticisms, you're an idiot, all of those types of things, which I guess would be criticisms, at Dan Mathews ATL, 1T in Mathews is how you can find me. So please go ahead and hit me up. I love seeing the red number on here going up to about 20 of, some of them are likes, some of them are right-ons, and then others of them are, you're an idiot. I can't believe you speak into a microphone for a living, which feel free to use that line if you'd like to. If you don't agree with what I said, I can take it.
All right, so just want to say thanks to Dan the Man for hopping on the show. And always a good time with Dan Mathews. I was actually on the Chuck Oliver show immediately after recording this. So if you heard that, just give you a little window into the timeline for that. But hey, that's going to do it for this episode of the show. We got National Signing Day coming up here on Wednesday. We're going to have a ton of coach comments coming up. Friend of the show, Stephen Lasson, making his return to the program on the next episode. So that'll be a hell of an episode. And I think we'll have some more surprises, some more guests coming up. Should be a really outstanding week of shows. I appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out, even during the deadness of the off season. If you're here late January, early February, you are a diehard SEC football fan, and we're doing these shows just for you. So I truly do appreciate each and every one of you. Hope to see you on the next one.